Hello there everyone, welcome to this in-depth guide on Whitebeard in OP2. To all my patrons, thank you so much for your support, I really do appreciate it. And to all my new patrons, a special thank you for joining the club. If you are seeing this on YouTube, it's probably quite late in the OP2 format, so I'm not sure how much more use you're going to be getting out of this, especially considering the Moby Dick hit, which I'll be talking about more a little later. But if you are interested in seeing content like this early on my Patreon during the format, I think, it's pretty useful. One of my patrons ended up getting top 8 with Kinemon after my Kinemon guide. I'm not taking full credit, of course, the guy's a good player, but, I'm going to take a little bit of credit. Then you should consider subscribing to the Patreon. I think it's a pretty reasonable fee for what you're getting. Anyway, enough shilling. Let's go ahead and jump into the video. So, as I say, this is an in-depth guide to Whitebeard in the OP2 format. I think this is a phenomenally powerful deck with, I think the most difficult part from an opponent's point of view when you're going against Whitebeard is it's very difficult to know what type of Whitebeard deck you're actually playing, because you do actually need to play around them slightly differently, and you need to be expecting different cards, I think is the more significant part of that. So let's go ahead and jump in to why Whitebeard. So obviously most important reason, Oyaji, that's the only reason anyone actually needs to play Whitebeard. I think and all the others are just nice to have. But as I was saying, there are very diverse deck builds, and in this guide, my previous deck guides, I usually give one deck list, and then I'd say, okay, well, you can kind of build off this. I've given 3 this time because I really do think they play quite differently. I probably only needed to do 2, but I think I've given 3 here because I think they are quite good. The deck is powerful. All 3 of the builds are powerful, and yes, okay, there's going to be debate between them. Really, it comes down to there's a sliding scale between consistency and ceiling, and essentially which you think is best is going to depend on your philosophy in a best of 1 format. I think there's a very valid argument that you should be playing the most consistent thing in a best of 1 format because it's best of 1 and you want to minimize your odds of bricking. Equally, I think there's a very compelling argument that you should be maximizing your high roll potential, because ultimately, if it's best of 1 anyway, if you need luck to be with you anyway, well, if luck is with you, why not absolutely destroy the day and have the best chance of winning the whole thing rather than just aiming for a top? I think both very valid stances to take, philosophically about this children's trading card game, and something that actually Whitebeard lets you have access to in full capacity. The deck is still good in OP3 now. Of course, Moby Dick has been banned in Japan very recently as the time of this recording. And I do think that will filter into the English format as soon as Set 3 releases. I don't think Moby Dick will be available for Whitebeard in Set 3, but I think the deck is still going to be quite good. Now, of course, that remains to be seen. It is still 2 weeks away from actually getting banned, and I think a lot of players are just going to hop over to Ace because it's the new hotness, though I do still think Whitebeard is very, very good, and you shouldn't sleep on the fact that, it was putting up results without Moby Dick in 2 separate builds during OP2. There's nothing to say it won't in OP3 as well, and of course, 6k base is unbelievable. 6 life, there's a whole other host of 6 life, 6k base, that's, is very, very nice. So, what are the big strengths of the Whitebeard deck? As I said, 6k is insane. There are 3 equally strong deck builds which are played differently, and a consequence of them being played differently is your opponent may not know for the first 3-4 turns of the game what you're actually doing, and it may be too late for them to play around it at that point. It's also worth saying that the non-Moby Dick builds are actually really consistent. While I was putting together this guide, I realized I found it quite difficult to think of an actively, bad Whitebeard hand, because typically speaking, you are going to be filtering through 4 additional cards from your life throughout the game before you hit, your top end. And, the fact you're going through, essentially you're going to be seeing 12, 13, 14 cards, in the first 4 turns of the game. It's very difficult to actually brick. Now, of course, I say non-Moby builds are consistent. Moby Dick builds are still consistent if you just don't care about seeing Moby Dick. Though, of course, you're playing Moby Dick, so you do. And that's really the biggest spook. And you should be hard mulliganing pretty much for Moby Dick, or a half-decent hand in the Moby Dick build, since that is what you are going for. That is your high roll. But outside of that, as I was going through, I was like, okay, I mean, really, you're just mulliganing for your power cards, but, if you don't see them, your odds of drawing them are pretty high. You're seeing so many cards, so that's the really nice thing. You can go either first or second. Of course, it's better in some matchups to be going first or be going second, but that's actually not so much about you as it is about the opponent. You want to disadvantage the opponent. The opponent actually cares whether they're going first or second. So a good example of this is Ivankov. Ivankov actively will want to go second in this matchup because it actually allows them to continually apply pressure throughout the game whilst engaging in their game plan, whereas if you go first, they're just not going to be able to attack until turn 5 with their leader. Like, they're just not going to be able to if they're following an ideal curve, and if they're not following an ideal curve, well then who cares? They're not following an ideal curve. So in that sense, you are very flexible because all you care about is disadvantaging the opponent, and you don't really get an advantage or a disadvantage, more importantly, either way. And of course, as I said, bad hands, and I was talking about consistency, it's really rare. Like, usually you have things to do, and that is very, very nice. It feels good to have these fat hands, let me tell you. But what are some disadvantages? Well, it is a pretty linear game plan, right? Like, build a wide board, hit 1 life or 2 life, play a 9-cost character Whitebeard, try and overwhelm. And the counter is also very linear. Big swings later on in the game, don't attack early, don't commit resources. It's fairly straightforward from both sides, and it's a pretty popular deck. And as I said there, the opponent technically only needs 1 hit, right? Ultimately, you are on a clock. You are going down to 0 life by your own leader effect. So eventually, your opponent just needs to hit 1 big swing where you don't have a blocker, and that's kind of it. You're also very reliant on building a big board to secure kills. So if you are considering matchups where your opponent is able to hard remove, such as black, rest and deal with, such as green, hard remove again, such as red, which is a little more difficult, but very, very doable, or bounce, such as blue, if they're able to continually set back that game plan, you can find yourself in a bit of a sticky situation. And of course, you are always on the clock, as I said, and that is something you're just going to be keeping in mind always. It doesn't matter how far ahead you are. If you go down to 0 and you don't have a blocker and you don't have a lot of counter in hand, your opponent can just win with a 15k swing out of nowhere, and you're just going to be like, well, sick. So these are weaknesses, certainly, but I think they are very much mitigated by the incredible strengths Whitebeard has. Okay, so now we're going to go into the key cards. So this was quite difficult because the 3 different builds of Whitebeard do tend to focus on different things. So obviously in a Moby Dick version of Whitebeard, Moby Dick is a key card. In a Straw Hat version of Whitebeard, cards like 5-cost Luffy are key cards, which you don't actually necessarily play in the other builds. So what I've done is I've taken the 3 cards that certainly Marco and Ace you play in all builds. And then Whitebeard, I think you probably should be playing in all builds. 9-cost Whitebeard is just so strong. So I've put them all here. I also realised that I put the Japanese ones on. My bad, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain each of these cards and why they're so good anyway. So Marco is a blocker which has the effect on KO where you can trash a Whitebeard Pirates from your hand and put him back in play in rest. Now, something to be wary of with Marco is a good opponent. If you're a bad Whitebeard player and you block too early, a good opponent is just going to keep slamming into Marco, and either you are going to be depleting your hand very quickly to keep Marco alive, or they're going to deal with the Marco for free. So you actually need to be very careful when you are using your Marco effect, otherwise you might find yourself losing the Marco or losing your hand, both of which can lose you the game. Ace is incredibly powerful. Giving minus 3,000 power to 2 of your opponent's units allows you to do a little bit of cleanup duty on the board. He's a 7k body, which means he's quite difficult for the opponent to remove in and of himself, and of course he gets Rush in your Whitebeard leader. So typically, an on-curve Ace on turn 4 is going to let you just deal with whatever your opponent is attacked with on their turn, or even if they haven't done any of that, you get a 6k swing and a 7k swing, and it's a 7k body that your opponent is going to have to heavily commit into, and I'm comfortable giving up a couple of counters to protect the Ace. I think that's fine, because again, it's a 7k body, it's going to be very easy to protect, and if they swing 11 into it or something, that's so much Don that I think it's more than worth it for how much value that card is giving you. And of course, I think 9-cost Whitebeard doesn't really need any explanation, but I will say anyway, your leader gains plus 2,000 power until the start of your next turn, and then you cannot add life to your hand with any of your effects, and Dom 2, you KO a card with 3,000 or less power. So of course, you play Whitebeard on curve, you're an 8k base, you're not dying. It is almost impossible for that to happen. And then on the next turn, if you were to hypothetically slam down an ace, chuck 2 Dons onto Whitebeard, suddenly you are KOing blockers of basically any relevant blocker in the game outside of 7-cost Kid is being instantly KO'd by that combination, and you have a huge amount of aggression. Of course, combine that with Moby Dick, and it is GG. But even without Moby Dick, that is a lot for any deck to deal with. So now what I'm going to do is go through a few deck lists. So this is Dickless Whitebeard, because this is just a pure value version of the deck. I'm going to explain basically most of these choices, right? So Otama is pretty self-explanatory. Giving minus 2,000 power is going to let you engage in some cheeky KOs with things like your not your character Whitebeard. It just generally make your opponent's blockers much less effective, and it's also a 2k counter. I think Otama is pretty self-explanatory. Sanji is also very, very good. This is because it is just a random 7k body where potentially you might just want to be adding, like, you know, sometimes you just want to add a life to your hand to just actually be applying that pressure. Obviously, in Whitebeard, you are going to be adding that life to your hand anyway, so it's not like your opponent can starve you on resources. But having a free 7k attacker later on in the game, that can just win you the game, right? Like, if you're in a position where that's game on board, you should absolutely go for it. But again, it is a 2k counter. Bartholomew, I think, is a really nice card in OP2 because in certain matchups, a chump blocker is just going to get popped by a Vista or something. But you put 2 Dons onto Bartholomew and suddenly it's a 5k blocker. Suddenly it's ineffective against Vistas and stuff like that. Suddenly they have to commit a large quantity of resources, i.e. an Otama or an Ace drop or something. They've got to be committing into dealing with that. Of course, Atmos, Kingju, and Thatch are your big vanilla beaters. These are going to be what secure you the game later on when you are smashing face with huge numbers. Jozu is a 2k counter which can gain Rush for absolutely no reason, so that card is phenomenal as well. Ace, again, needs no introduction. Mask Juice is nice in that sometimes you can just get that pop-off effect off, but mainly you're just playing this because it's a 2k counter, and the ult art's about $6, so, you know, you can flex that way. Marco, again, needs no introduction, and then Radical Beam and Guard Point are amazing cards in Whitebeard because Guard Point is a 3k counter for 1 Don, very efficient, and Radical Beam is a 4k counter, guaranteed for 1 Don by the time you're actually protecting any real attacks. Radical Beam is going to be doing heavy, heavy work. So Strawbeard, this is credit to Cram369 on Twitter, who got 2nd place at the online championship. So I've just yoinked this list from them, but thank you so much, Cram. I don't even know if they know that I've used this, but I figured why put my own build here when there's literally one that just saw massive success in a tournament. I might as well just show you that one. It makes more sense. And the way Strawbeard works is you are playing a big package of Straw Hats. You're taking advantage of the added consistency that gives you, and you're abusing some of the most powerful cards in the game, such as 5-cost Monkey D. Luffy. This card is unbelievably powerful. Cheating through blockers is just going to let you end games when, by all accounts, you really shouldn't be. I mean, ultimately, this is, at worst, an 11k swing, which, you know, sometimes your opponent is just not going to be able to stop. Like, that can just randomly secure you a game. Even against an opposing Whitebeard player, like, it can just win you the game. It's such a powerful card. Brook is an amazing 2k counter, and you really are just able to take advantage of all the good Straw Hats. Not that much to say, it's just big vanillas, big power, big beatdown. That is how the deck works. And finally, we've got Big Dick Energy Whitebeard. This is the Moby Dick version of Whitebeard. The big change is, of course, we are playing Seaquake to deal with chump blockers, and we're playing a few more chump blockers. Sometimes you do need to buy a little bit more time. We're playing Squad to trigger our Moby Dicks potentially a little bit early. And, of course, we are playing Moby Dick because that card is very, very good, and it's going to let us secure kills. So all 3 of these builds, I think, are, I'm not saying these are necessarily the optimal versions, but I would say about 40 to 45 to maybe even 46 of the cards in the deck just don't really change. So, you know, you can make changes to them. By all means, please do, for your meta, for what you think is better, for what tech choices you might think are better. But fundamentally, the shell is the same. Regardless of which, like in general, depending on the build you are playing. So now that we've seen the deck lists, let's go ahead and talk through the matchups. So, firstly, we'll talk about Zoro. This is probably one of, if not the most popular decks in the format. It is incredibly powerful. It's very straightforward to play. It doesn't take a huge amount of brain power, which means it's an excellent pick if you are talking about a tournament that is, you know, let's say 9 rounds long, something like this is going to be really, really good. This is why you would play Zorro. Now, the matchup I think is quite advantageous, but going first is important. And the reason for this is it lets you curve into Whitebeard on your turn 5. It puts the Zorro player behind in terms of the amount of attacking turns they get. Because if you think about, if Zorro goes first, right, they attack on their turn 2, their turn 3, their turn 4, and their turn 5 before you are able to play your character Whitebeard, which will let you be on that 8k base, making it very difficult for them to do the wide damage that the deck is so good at doing. Whereas if you go first, they get their second turn, their third turn, and their fourth turn of attacking, which is only 3 turns of attacks before you are able to put down the Whitebeard and making things much more difficult for them. In addition, because you get to attack first, you're able to push the Zorro player down to about 2 life is the threshold you should be aiming for, because at that point you are able to secure a kill very easily. Zorro does not have a large amount of defense at all in terms of counter and in terms of blockers. I would say this is quite an advantageous matchup for Whitebeard. So again, to reiterate, curving into Whitebeard is very important. You want to be going first to disadvantage the Zorro player significantly, and play around Jet Pistol is the other really, really big part. The amount of times I've seen players throw games because they don't think about Jet Pistol, and either they don't attach a Don to one of their characters first, or they swing with their or they don't swing with the character first, right? If you're going to swing with leader first, make sure you've distributed Dons so everything is 7k or greater. Now, of course, this isn't an issue in the Moby Dick kill turn because everything's going to be buffed by 2k anyway, and so you probably if you're only playing like Atmos isn't bigger, then it's not going to be an issue. But again, you play Marcos, so you want to be playing around randomly losing those cards. The reason the only mulligan target I put here is the 9-cost Whitebeard is this is a really big card you need to see to make sure you don't just get absolutely bullied. And if you curve into this into 9-cost Whitebeard, you're vibing. And this is why I think a build with 4 copies of this card is so good, because you can't really lose as Whitebeard even if you're playing it turn after turn after turn after turn. Like, you're fine doing that. And it gives you so much aggression, so much kill power. The card is absolutely amazing. So moving on to the next matchup, I'll be talking about the mirror. This is kind of awkward, kind of annoying, because you don't know what build your opponent is going to be playing. They don't know what build you're going to be playing. I would say you would prefer to go first, because that means, yes, the opponent is attacking first, but they're also taking life first. And it means that you are able to if you're able to weather their turn 5, you have one extra Don than compared to what they have, and that can potentially allow you to close out a game. You also just give them a little bit less time to find their 9-cost Whitebeard to curve into it, just like slightly less card advantage to go through. But basically, don't go face until they're at 1 life or less. It's kind of a waste of time. If they attack with any of their characters, and if you can bait them into doing so, that's ideal. Absolutely kill them, because it's going to come down to who is able to build a wider board and who's able to just absolutely secure the dub. A Moby Dick build is probably better going into any kind of mirror because they are just hitting bigger numbers. But obviously, you are playing the variance game in that situation. But the TLDR is build a wide board, mull for your power cards, and make sure you make good use out of them. So next we have got Kinemon. This is a really interesting one because Kinemon is very, very popular, and I think Whitebeard is quite a good matchup for it. But it does depend on what the Kinemon player sees. They can kind of just, high roll Odin you. So you want to be searching for Atmos, Ace, and Newgate, mainly because these are insanely powerful cards, especially Newgate, and you want to be building, again, this huge wide board because green really doesn't have very good defensive tools. By that I mean, yes, it has a lot of blockers, but chump blockers are very, very bad in this format. Your Vistas are going to be dealing with them with the greatest of ease. I probably should have put a mulligan target as Vista on here, but it's less important than these other ones. Also, your 9-cost character Whitebeard is just going to be popping these blockers when you swing into them. Additionally, you don't really care about them playing a Yamato on curve. So ideally, you would actually want to be going second here, because it means that going first, they're kind of losing this insane curve that they would have access to otherwise. But yeah, generally you want to avoid playing blockers. They're likely to just get arrested and then swung into, and you don't want to be protecting your blockers with like huge amounts of resources. It's kind of an L. Just focus on building a wide board and apply pressure. Try to get the kin 1 player to that sort of 2 life threshold, because that will let you secure a kill on your kill turn. Green really doesn't have a lot of counter power. Like, remember that as well. Like, you know, I typically on a kill turn will see a green player have maybe 8k counter power if they've been like saving up for it. If you're just dealing with their blockers, which is what they really rely on, it's very easy to just secure a kill out of nowhere. Remember to play around Gibsons and stuff like that, because your Atmoses will be vulnerable to a Gibson, so swing with your Atmos first. But otherwise, it's kind of difficult to fumble the bag. The biggest potential issue is 8-cost Odin, because Odin is an 8k body that says pay 3, restand this, which means it's 15k twice. So if you don't establish blockers, or if they have an Okiku, they attach 1 Don onto the Okiku. If you've only got 1 blocker, you swing and they swing with the Okiku, they tap your blocker, suddenly you're in a lot of trouble, because that is 14k twice and a 6k swing. And that is very, very scary. Of course, curving into 9-cost Newgate is going to make that a little bit easier for you, and if they invest all their resources in trying to kill you on that turn, then they're kind of done, because you should be able to get them on the crackback. But just deal with Odin if you can immediately. That card can be very, very, very scary, and usually it's going to be the second turn of Odin in play, like the second attacking turn of Odin in play, when they're going to be going for the kill. Unlikely they're in a position the first turn they play it where they're going to be able to secure that, so just try and deal with it. If you can't, again, it's not a massive deal if you are able to have the defense to back that up, but be really wary that your blockers are probably not doing much in this game, and you're probably going to have to hard counter with stuff. Definitely want to be focusing on playing the bigger units that can't be rested. So, you know, Thatchers, Aces, Newgates are going to be doing a lot of work for you, absolutely. But again, like, I'm not saying don't play small things, it's just you got to be wary of those, of the resting and stuff. Ivankov, this is probably your nicest matchup from these new leaders. I think this one is advantageous, and you got to go second. If you are able to go second, the Ivankov player is probably going to have quite a bad time. The reason for this is Ivankov's ideal curve on turn 1 is going to be a buggy. On turn 2, it's probably like a 3-cost blocker Doflamingo or something like that. Turn 3, they're at 5 Don, it's going to be the 7k Crocodile, and then turn 4, it's going to be SR Ivankov playing out SR Luffy. That's their ideal curve. Now, what you notice about this is if they are playing the ideal curve, they are not going to be having 6k swings. However, if they go second, they are able to play the ideal curve and also have 6k every single turn, swinging into your face, just applying a little bit of extra pressure. Even if they only get 1 or 2 extra cards out of your hand, that can be the make or break. Because remember, those 6-cost Luffys are bouncing your blockers. They're getting double attack. They can be like, the double attack tends not to matter so much, but the fact that they are able to just bounce your blockers is very, very scary. Now, the nice thing is, if you're able to build a wide board, because the Ivankov player is not really doing anything for the first, 4 turns of the game, basically. Yeah, okay, they can bounce one of your cards with Luffy on turn 4 if they curve into it. You should be able to just apply pressure. Go face. Ivankov does not have a lot of counter power by nature of the fact it's trying to empty out its hand. Fundamentally, a deck with 2 cards in hand, and even at like 2 life or 3 life left, it's not going to be able to have that much defensive, ability. So you should be able to secure kills quite easily against Ivankov. Just focus on getting them to low life, make sure to build out your board, and just kill them on turn 5. Don't let them have time, because the longer you actually let the Ivankov player live, the in more danger you are. I mean, that's just a general rule for Whitebeard. Like, the longer the game goes on, the more sticky things look for you, so you want to be abusing the fact that you're a 6k body and just applying relentless pressure, but that is the reason why. Overall, though, I think Ivankov definitely an advantageous matchup for you. Make sure you go second, though. Kaido, again, I think this is quite an advantageous matchup for similar reasons. You want to be going first here because, but sort of, well, similar but kind of opposite. So the reason you want to be going first is, yes, okay, you will, the Kaido player can potentially be swinging 6k into you each turn, but you swinging 6k into them every single turn, getting the first attack, being able to build that pressure before they can, is way scarier for the Kaido player. This is a deck that is not doing anything the first few turns of the game, right? Remember that. They are, on turn 2, they're trying to play Onigashima. On turn 3, if they're lucky, they're playing a Queen. Usually they're playing like a Magellan or something. And again, you don't necessarily care that much if they play a Magellan, because you are just playing big vanilla bodies and you're going face. It's going to be like turn 4, turn 5 when they're actually able to apply pressure by removing your units. And if you're able to get them down to low life, you can just like secure like very easy kills. Also, potentially, I mean, just be wary of a random life burn and securing them securing a kill that way. But anyway, back to sort of the little text here. Keep pressuring the leader with your 6k swings and build a board and just keep the pressure up. Make sure, and this is really important, make sure you play cards first so you don't get caught out by a surprise Don -1. And because I've seen that happen, and it's really awkward, because it's like, okay, well, you could have played an ace there, had a 7k rusher, been like doing power minus their blockers, so they would have to lose them if they blocked with them, they wouldn't be able to protect them, but instead you swung with leader first and they hit a Don -1, and now you only have 6 Don, and maybe the best card in your hand is like, I don't know, like an Atmos, which is still fine, but it's nowhere near as good as playing an ace on curve or something, right? So just make sure you're not falling victim to that. The other thing is, play around Hell's Judgment. What does this mean? 8k is your magic number, so that is forcing extra cards out of the opponent's hand. Always be aware of Hell's Judgment. Either swing 8 or swing like 6, 5 or 6. Like don't swing 7. Like basically, never swing 7 against Kaido, because that is their ideal number for making a Hell's Judgment absolutely ruin your day. Next, Smoker. I would say Black is pretty much your worst matchup. So you want to be mulliganing for 9 cost and 7 cost Ace and Newgate, again for the same sort of reasons. Same and similar. So firstly, Black tends to have a very low hand. So the reason Ace is so good is because you're just putting pressure on. It's a 7 cost, which can make it it's impossible for them to easily remove if you play the Ace on curve. Because they're not going to be able to 10 cost Kuzan. They're not able to like do the usual nonsense that like Zed is able to do, for example. So these big cards are actually very difficult for Smoker to remove. It's much easier for them to remove your Marcos, your King Jews, your Atmoses and things. And then, of course, having a huge unit swinging face, they're not going to have the counter power to deal with that, more than likely. It's not a deck with the best defense. So these kind of cards are absolutely going to bully them. And again, being an 8k body is just very difficult for them to hit over. However, the reason this is slightly disadvantageous is if they're able to control your board, kind of rough, right? Like if you are not playing out your power, like your big top end power cards, if you're just playing 4 costs and 5 costs, and they're just going, okay, cool, Sakazuki, okay, cool, Smoker Effect, Kobe, and you're just losing your board, it can be really tough. And again, you're on a clock, and you know it'll only take 2 turns of Smoker like just doing big swings for you to die. So like ultimately it is also quite luck based. The reason for that is Smoker has to hard draw everything. So you want to do your normal game plan of building a wide board with large cost units as much as you can, and basically just hope they don't open the nuts. Because if they just see Admiral after Admiral after Admiral, like if they see Kuzan 4 cost, that can really ruin your day, because that's going to suddenly make their Kobes hit your Aces. That's going to make their 10 cost Kuzan hit your Newgate on the turn they play it. It's also going to let them just hit Newgate also with a Sakazuki, so these are things to bear in mind. But they are inconsistent. Keep the pressure on. They don't have the best defense, and just hope basically that they didn't open something absolutely nonsensical. Then we have Law. So Law, this is again slightly disadvantageous, but I think it's less of a big deal because Law is unlikely to be that popular in the format, at least for now, until players learn the meta. So you want to be searching for your King Jews, your Newgates, and your Aces, and the reason for that is because you just want to be putting out big vanillas and applying pressure. Of course, if you have like 5 cost Luffy and you're playing the Strawbeard variant, that's going to be very good in this matchup as well. The reason you want to be going second here is you want to be denying the Law player that potential advantage, and you want to be like generally it's tough to know when you want to be swapping from dealing with the Law player's units to just going face, but because you don't really have like the best removal earlier on in the game, you don't really have like ways of just resting your opponent's stuff, and typically a good Law player is not going to be resting their things. You can just go face, apply pressure, and put yourself in that situation where the Law player is at 1 life, and then suddenly they're facing down very large swings. The Law player is going to be relying on a big board of blockers to deal with you, but if you are able to just apply huge amounts of pressure, that is not going to be enough. The big thing you want to be careful of is restander Law. If they can play that out for 2 because of their leader effect, so it's entirely possible if they got a board of 5, they are literally just going to slam 8 Dons onto the 6k Law, go 14, bounce, play a run tapper, go 14 again, and if you don't have lots of blockers, that will just kill you. So you want to be aware that that is a thing. And again, play around Jet Pistol. It's a red deck. You do not want to be getting scummed by a random Jet Pistol in life. And I think finally we have got Zed or Zephyr. So this one is again disadvantageous. The thing with Zephyr is it's more vulnerable to you just applying loads of pressure, but it also removes your board way more easily. So this one just feels like very, very 50-50. I've put it as slightly disadvantageous because, again, it really does depend. But basically, apply pressure. They only have 4 life. Keep going face. They're inconsistent. They need to hard roll the 10-cost Kuzan to kill them before they can. Remember that the good Zephyr decks are playing a lot of 2k counters. So don't go 7, or don't go 6, go 7. Force them to be taking those 2 cards out of their hand. A good Whitebeard player is going to swing this matchup, and it's going to be way more difficult for the Zephyr player. But a bad Whitebeard player is probably going to get stomped by Zephyr. So that's the thing to keep in mind. Apply lots of pressure. Try to play bigger units, but accept the fact that like Whitebeard is your best one because the turn they play 10-cost Kuzan, they can deal with anything 8-cost or lower and a 5-cost or lower as well. Whitebeard is a 9-cost. So you want to be going second because it forces them to have to ramp to play some ramp, and like they're going to get out 10-cost Kuzan later. And also their your 9-cost Whitebeard, unless they have a 4-cost Kuzan on the board, the turn you play it is not going to be dealt with immediately, which means you have big pressure, and it's going to let you deal with that. Borsalino is a card that exists. It's scary. Deal with it. But with that being said, I do believe that is the end of this little presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed this guide to Whitebeard. I'm gonna go all the way back to the start here, to the cover page. If you guys found this video useful, please do let me know in the comment section, of course on Patreon or on YouTube. If you've got any questions about Whitebeard, of course, please do leave those in the comments. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel if you're seeing this on YouTube, and consider subscribing to the Patreon for content like this in a much more timely way in terms of events available on that Patreon. And again, thank you so much to all my Patreon supporters. It really does mean a lot, and you are helping me fund my Max Rarity Black collection, which I will show off sooner rather than later. Okay, that's it. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next in-depth guide, which I think will be on Ivankov, but it might be Zorro, might be Smoker. We're going to see what decks end up doing well at all these championship events. Thanks for watching again. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.